It's great to connect. I would love to start at your origin story. And if you've listened to any of my stuff before, I love to just understand someone's childhood and their upbringing in
Yeah.
their family, because I feel like that shapes a lot of how we view the world and some of the decisions that we make. So I love to learn, what did your parents do for a living, and how did that impact some of the career decisions you might have made?
Yeah, and it's funny because so growing up, my mom, when I was young, was home with us, and my dad, he started in consumer packaged goods, and to understand my dad, he has a pretty interesting story. He lost his father when he was very very young, so grew up in the 50s with a working mom. In Brooklyn, and then when they realized they didn't need a passport to leave Brooklyn, they moved to Long Island like everybody else. Um, it's kind of funny, uh, and his parents, like, or his mom, moved right next door to his uncle, like the same street, the same split level, looking exactly identical. But he worked, he put himself through college. Um, his whole family told him, as a nice Jewish boy from Long Island, that he had to be a lawyer, and decided after pre law in undergrad, he wanted to go into business. So he worked in consumer packaged goods marketing, and started at Colgate Palmolive, and worked his way. His international assignment at Colgate Palmolive was to move to Boston, and look after a small shoe company, a sneaker company called Etonic, that Colgate owned. And so, I grew up watching my dad sort of classically climbing the corporate ladder. He was a guy that he wore his suit and had his briefcase every day. And my mom was home with us. And by the time I got to elementary school, my mom went back to work as a realtor. And if I fast forward all the way along, my dad was, really successful. He looked after Adidas for a while, here in the U.S., and worked in sporting goods for most of his career. But it was my mom who went from being a local realtor and then ended up opening up her own shop. And by the time I was in college, my mom was one of the most productive realtors in the state of New Jersey, and my dad was working for her. And so it was kind of incredible to watch my mom become this entrepreneur. And I think it's unfortunately, I lost both of my parents young, and only now that I've gone on this sort of entrepreneurial journey did I realize that it wasn't my dad who was the entrepreneur, but it was my mom. Even though my dad had all these big jobs.
That's awesome. Wow. I think moms, I don't know if you can also see this, but I feel like, raising kids, that's the hardest thing. If you can do that, like pretty successfully, I see, like, at my wife, like, you can do almost anything, when you go back to work. So that's cool to see that.
Yeah, and it's funny because Missy, my wife, she was home with our kids when we decided to start Boll Branch, and I don't know that she ever necessarily set out to go start a business. And she's a machine, and I think the way she looks at it, she was putting all of her time. She was never sitting at home, right? And that sort of thing. So whether she was running a local volunteer project, she ran the art program at the kids' schools, like you know I think that there's so much talent that sometimes sits on the bench, and people just need a push.
Yeah.
And I think that today, um, starting a business is the bar to actually start something is a lot lower. It's very easy to start something, maybe not as easy to make it work, but I think so many women that may have left the workforce are able to re-enter in more of an entrepreneurial journey, and it's incredible to watch how successful they are.
What was Missy's background before kids? What did she do, or what did she
She was in
study?
elementary. She was a third grade school teacher. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, so and look, and she and I, we met when we were 19, at Vanderbilt, and so she's been managing me, which is like managing a 3-year-old, for many many years. So elementary education was an easy fit, and now she's still trying to keep me out of trouble, even in the office.
That's cool. That's a talent in itself. I mean, I see my son at like taekwondo class, and I see the master. I'm like, I don't know how you do it. It's like magic. How do you keep the attention of these kids, all at the same time? And then once class is over, they just disseminate, to the
But you know
crazy.
what's funny? I actually believe that teachers are the most pure form of entrepreneur, especially good ones, because their classroom is like their own business. And
Yeah.
yeah, there's some standards within the school district, but they have a lot of freedom because it's impossible to manage. They have to put not only their own lesson plans together, and then they have to understand their students, which are like consumers in a way, and how to customize those lessons to end up connecting with them. I mean, it's one-to-one CRM marketing in its purest
Yeah.
form. And so I there's an interesting there's so many people that have been teachers that have gone on to be successful in um, other areas, and I think it's because of that sense of independence that you're forced to have
Yeah.
right off the bat. You just can't lean on anybody else but yourself.
And all the students have different parenting styles at home, right? And you got to think, I imagine, through all that stuff, discipline, all that.
Absolutely.
I could never do it. So, okay. Most important lesson from your parents, mom or dad, what comes to mind? Something maybe you'd want to instill in your kids. And I forgot to ask you, how many kids, how old are they?
So I have three daughters. My oldest
Wow.
is 20. She's a sophomore at Clemson, and then I have twin girls that are about to turn 17, and they are juniors in high school.
Wow. Awesome. Okay. And so is
So
there something that comes to mind from mom or dad when you think about like a lesson you want to instill in your daughters, or maybe you already have?
yeah, family first. And I'll use my dad as an example of that. So, my dad was CEO of Adidas, and that job had him traveling to Germany for like lunch meetings and all over the world. And he may be going from Europe to California, and he would figure out a way to make sure he was even just doing a layover so that he could see us for 2 3 hours
Wow.
during the week when he was traveling around. And I, I always used to ask my dad, like, as I got older, why, gosh, you're putting yourself through so much. And he's like, my presence, and I only do this for you guys, for my family. And at the end of the day, that you can never get back time. And so I wanted to take every moment I could, even though I was trying to build this career and do these things. It was always about family. And again, I lost my dad a couple weeks before I graduated college, and so those are the lessons that I think about now. Time is undefeated, right? It's the undefeated champion. um, so none of us know what we have, so we need to take advantage of that and make sure that we're investing our time into the things that matter most. And for me, that's my family, and I try to be really intentional about um, helping my kids learn that at the end of the day, um, success or lack of success, or wins and losses, like, they're great in the professional life, but when you come home, it's the people that you lean on when it doesn't matter if you're successful or not. You're just dad, or you're just mom, or you're
Yeah.
just Sophie or Brooke or Haley, and those are the things that matter most.
Did they play a lot of sports growing up?
Yeah. So my girls all played soccer. I played soccer. Missy played soccer.
Oh,
And but it's funny. So one of my daughters, Haley, she's a junior in high school. I never played lacrosse. I don't know the rules. I didn't understand it. Her freshman year, she's like, I'm gonna try out for the lacrosse team. I was like, all right. She ends up making varsity as a freshman. She's like become a really good player. I had to YouTube a whole lot of like instructional videos about lacrosse, but I think that, like, I think sports is such a wonderful teacher. It teaches us how to be a part of a team, how to lean on each other, and all of those things. So I love that all of my girls have played sports. None of them, I would say, and I wouldn't offend them by saying none of them have been these like exceptional, I'm going to go play in college type standouts, but they've been really good teammates, and I think had learn the lessons from tough losses when things don't
yeah.
go your way, which are really important. But also have those wins too.
That's cool. I wanted to ask you about leadership. I mean, I think of even your dad or your mom, like, real estate in itself, you've got to be really self-disciplined. But when you think about
Hmm.
even in your professional career, the leaders you've been around in the first, I would say, chapter of your career at these like sort of bigger consumer brands, what are the commonalities or those common denominators that come to mind about the leaders who sustain excellence?
I, I was very lucky to work for some incredible people, and these were people that taught a lot. And I think that one of the things I felt was that the people that are willing to invest the time in teaching and then get out of the way and give you the opportunity to succeed or fail, those are the leaders that to me had the longest lasting impact. So I think about my very first boss was a woman named Michelle Kessler, and Michelle, I only worked for her for probably 2 or 3 years, but there's still lessons that I take today. So I was in charge of digital marketing, and I say this lovingly. She was not the most tech forward marketing person that you would meet, and she always found a way to ask the right questions. When something didn't go right, she wasn't going to be able to help me find a technical solution for it, but she might ask me something like, all right, so what did we learn from that? How are we going to think about that next time? And it just always it always landed for me that you can be a leader even if you don't have functional expertise in a certain area. If you understand how to help somebody to solve their own problems, how to help them to
Mm,
do what they need to do, rather than doing it for them. And and that's what I try to be as a leader. I always this morning I was having every once a month I have all of our the people that have joined our company over that month. We just do lunch, and it's usually over Zoom because people could be all over the place. And today I was saying, most companies you work for, people will say, "Oh, the CEO is the most busy person." I'm probably not the most busy person, and I think that might be a qualification that I'm doing a decent job as a leader, because I'm going to get out of your way. My job is primarily to make sure that I'm clearing roadblocks for you. I'm insulating you so you can do your best work. I'm challenging you when you need to get challenged. But at the end of the day, giving you the opportunity, you came and work for a small business because you want the opportunity to see what impact does my work have on the business and on the world. And so, I think that's what I learned from folks is that, when you give someone the opportunity to fail, more often than not, they succeed.
yeah, I love that. That was my next question of like who are some of those people? Michelle sounded amazing. When you reflect back, could be Michelle, but like who do you think has impacted your career the most so far? Or even in those 13 years, like who sort of impacted it the most?
There were a few, and so I'll give you one example. A guy named Mike Branstetter. So Mike, most recently was the CEO of Tops, but when we started, he was the brand manager on Lifesavers, and I was like the junior cub cadet marketing guy in the like candy division of Kraft, like doing internet stuff. And um, I was in awe of Mike because of, even though he was not the most senior person in a room, he could captivate a room.
Yeah.
He was such a good communicator, um, and did it without ego. Did it without, I mean, he is probably the smartest guy in most rooms he walks into, but he never approached it that way. And over time, he's somebody that's actually become a mentor of mine. Maybe because I asked him to, maybe just because he was always willing to answer questions and whatnot. And Mike, more than anyone else, would challenge me. And I say this carefully. Like I was one of those people. So I was really young, and I was the digital marketing guy at Nabisco, and we were doing really well. We were kind of leaders in what we were doing around entertainment. I mean, we had this gaming website that became one of the like 100 most trafficked websites on the internet, and I was sort of looking after it. Um, so I was in a spot where a lot of people, especially because they were a lot older, um, I was like the young superstar, and they were like pouring a lot of honey in my ear, telling me how great I was. And Mike was someone that I thought was really effective at helping me to stay grounded. I worry,
Mm,
like, it's a little bit like venture capitalists can do with young entrepreneurs. You just give them so much funding that they believe they become invincible. And I can remember with Mike, like, uh, he'd be like, you're 2 years into your career and you're about to present to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. Like, do you know what you're going to say? Do you know what you're going to do? But then afterwards, when everyone else is like, wow, you did so great, he's like, your energy level was low there. You didn't think about delivering this point or this point. And I just like, I respected it so much. And because, we all say we want feedback. Sometimes we don't actually want feedback because we just want people to tell us how great we are. Um,
you
but I
felt like
think
it was
like
constructive though, like
it was really
yeah, yeah,
constructive. It was always like it was coming from the place that he wanted me to be better than I was,
yeah,
rather than somebody saying, "Wow, look how great you're doing." And when you feel that from somebody, it's really empowering.
yeah. I mean, I've done about 100 of these interviews, and I do wonder, people in your position now, like how do you get feedback from people that are telling you the truth? Like that's got to be tough, right?
It's
Because
impossible.
It's
it's impossible. But
intimidating, right?
I mean, you also have to try to create an environment where you can. You know, I I try to be really open, and open to feedback, and when you get feedback, if you act on it, people are willing to give you feedback again, and
Yeah.
again. And I think, look, when you're in my spot, right? I'm the founder, I'm the CEO. My investors seem to like me, so I'm probably not going anywhere. You can check with them. Um, there's a sense of like, I don't know, you don't feel challenged very often, and it can be scary for other folks to challenge me. Um, until they feel like I might hear them, or until
Yeah.
and so I work really hard to try to create an open environment, where I'm willing to listen and willing to be overruled, and those sorts of things. And then there's times where I really believe in something and I justify it. Right. I want to make sure that I justify it with the team, because a lot of people would say, all right, as a leader, you don't need justification. You don't need approval from your team. And in and of itself, that's true. And sometimes you have to make a tough call, and you have to make maybe a less popular decision. But I still think you need to hold yourself to the same standards you would hold anybody else in terms of laying out clear rationale and justification for your decision. Which again, I can couch that with, you may not agree with this, but here's why I'm reaching this decision. This is my thought process here. Um, I don't know. I think that creates openness, and people recognizing, like, look, I don't know the right answer to every question. I hate when people look down the table at me and they're like, Scott, just tell us the right answer. I'm like, I don't know. What do I know? Like, I'm just a
Yeah.
guy too.
Yeah. It's interesting. I know you guys have some retail locations. I imagine, I remember my first job out of college was working at a Verizon store, and there's so much I learned from that job, but there's so much you learn about consumer behavior in those four walls. And I imagine those are some of the folks that might have some insights from, they're on the front line, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I think you have to listen, and you've got to make
Yeah.
the time to listen, right? I love visiting our retail stores. Leslie, who's our store manager in our Boca Raton store, laughs because she knows my favorite job at the end of the day is sweeping. And and someone else was in there like, you have the CEO sweeping? She's like, leave Scott and his broom alone. He really likes to sweep and vacuum. And but I think that, like, those are the times where you're you know you just have an opportunity to learn from the folks that are seeing the business differently than you are. And I'm always trying to find more ways, and it's not easy. Like, as you have more stores and your business becomes more distributed, how do you make sure you're getting all that valuable feedback that's coming from when someone walks into our store and they're feeling our sheets and they're saying this or that? Like, those are like those are gems. Like,
Yeah.
it's so valuable. And so I think, again, trying to create that environment where everybody can feedback upwards is really, I think, important.
So I know you worked at Wrigley, and you said your old buddy worked at Tops. I got into the habit of like collecting.
No
Uh,
way.
this is a Gaudi, gum company 1933 card. It's not even worth that much, but it's in good condition. I just like love the style of the card. So I have a few old baseball cards in front of me. I thought that was funny.
That's awesome. I have
Yeah.
a funny story. So, the other day I had the opportunity to meet Al Leiter. He actually lives around here in Summit,
He was a
and
pitcher.
he
Am
was a
I
pitcher for the Mets, the Yankees, Blue
okay?
Jays, and I also collect baseball cards. And I
Oh,
have,
you do?
for whatever reason, in my desk, like, right up above here, I've got his rookie baseball card. And so I met him, and then that night I texted him. I'm like, I wasn't going to tell you, but I have to tell you, I have your rookie card sitting on my desk. So I took a picture of it and sent it to him. He's like, funny story. That one's worth a lot of money because they screwed it up. That's someone else's picture. That's not me. So
Oh,
it's
so
an
it's one of
error
those like
card.
error cards.
So,
That's funny.
yeah, yeah.
That's funny. What do you collect? Is it like vintage stuff, or is it like the new stuff?
No, it's old. It's stuff from my childhood, and I don't
Okay.
even look at the value of any of these things. It's just the players that I love. So I've got Ricky Henderson, I've got Reggie Jackson, Carlton Fisk, Cal Ripken.
That's
I grew up loving baseball, and it's funny because my interest in baseball has waned a little bit over the years, but it's just, there's something like really nostalgic about that time. And I used to sit and watch every Yankees game with a scorebook and keep scoring it. I have seasons
Wow.
worth of these books.
Wow.
Like,
That's
I
yeah,
know
that's
I
awesome.
was incredibly unpopular in high school. That's all I did. Just kidding.
Oh man. Yeah, there's like actually there's a book I just picked up. It's called The Glory of Their Times, and it had, I don't know if you've heard of it, but
Uh-uh.
I was on Facebook, one of those group like card groups, and somebody had it on their shelf, and it has basically a bunch of T206 cards on the cover, and it's basically what you know, the nostalgia you mentioned. Like I love that. Even this card's worth under $100 or whatever, but like it's from 1933 and it's in pretty
Hmm.
good condition. To me, it's like a piece of art. And I guess
For
it's
sure.
a book where it was like the last group of guys that they can interview to talk about that generation of like Ty Cobb and like those guys. And so it's like I guess it's like a bunch of interviews in a book. I love that stuff, but I
I
can.
love it too. That's great. There's something
um,
really romantic about baseball. Um, in its simpler times, people listening to it on the radio, the slow pace of the game, the fact that like you think about for generations, people could come home at the end of a workday or even in the middle of the workday when day games were happening and just turn on the radio or turn on TV and there's a baseball game for them. There's
yeah,
nothing quite like baseball in that way.
I think these guys like I grew up. Daryl Strawberry was, I mean, my favorite.
Got
That
them
was
right
like
here.
my guy.
Yeah,
That's funny. And I had like over 100 cards growing up, back when like nobody cared about like the condition really, right?
right.
As they do now. But back then they were like larger than life. I remember where my elementary school was, like Danny Tartable, who's like a common guy, like nobody probably even
Totally.
remembers, but he
I
lived
got
like behind our school. So it was like gated. It looked like a gated mansion when we were like 7 years old watching like the Sandlot, Uh,
That's great.
it's funny. Um, Okay, so let me try to package. One of my friends actually, I was thinking about this. So like when I just like look at the first part of your career, I think about like your
Mhm.
time at like Kraft and Wrigley and the candy stand. One of my friends always says like think of your career in like three chapters, 13 years
Mhm.
each, so to speak, and maybe it's give or take. But when you think back to life before Boll Branch, and the experiences that you had in those roles, how do you felt like it might have like set you up for success here?
My first phase, I was a sponge, and I just was so thrilled to be working at these companies with products that I had grown up with, um, and I just learned so much. And I was I just I think at that point in my life, I also I just lost my dad. I was in consumer packaged goods, which was his world. And
Yeah.
so I was like living my dream at that point and sort of felt like I'm not going to take this for granted. I'm going to learn everything I can. And so if there was a project where they're like, would anyone like to take this on? My hand was always up. And I just was like, give me more, give me more, give me more. I wasn't asking for promotions or anything like that. I just wanted to learn and consume. And so, I spent, yeah, that first chunk of my career, both feeling enamored by the work I had the opportunity to do and being really proud of that connection of then being able to walk into a grocery store and seeing the promotion on the
Mm.
side of the Triscuit box and feeling like you played a part in it. And I just got so much energy out of that. I had this side hustle, right, of this gaming website, Candy Stand, that I was also really passionate about because I love video games and I loved creating games, and nobody really cared about it, and we blew it up to this big thing. So my next phase was a shorter period of time, which was my leaving Wrigley and starting a company around gaming. And I'll be honest, I made every mistake in the book. The second phase of my career is one that I look back on and say, man, I made a ton of mistakes. First of all, I probably wasn't the easiest person to deal with. Even my time at Wrigley, I was based in New Jersey. The company was based in Chicago. So I struggled with relationships there. I didn't really understand the value of being face to face with people. I probably didn't do enough relationship building because I walked in with a strong reputation and whatnot, and maybe didn't build the bridges that I needed to. And then as I built, Fun Tank as a company, we didn't really have a vision. We were able to make revenue quickly because we acquired a business that was just untapped from a revenue standpoint. So commercially, we were doing well, and I think that covered up a lot of the things that we didn't do well around building a culture, making sure that we had the right talent, making sure that our team was motivated, that they understood what we were trying to do, that we understood what we were trying to do, frankly. And all of a sudden, the iPhone comes out, and gaming, I look at it, is about to change massively. And I look at it to say, are we good enough as a company? Am I good enough as a leader to now actually go head to head with electronic arts. Like, are we ready to do this? And I sold the company because I didn't think we would win, and that's very much not me in terms of backing down from a challenge. And again, life sort of happens in weird times. So we ended up selling the company to Publisher Clearinghouse. Um, the deal closed like first week of December. First week of January, my mom gets diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and so again, like, and you know how much family means to me and how close I am, and like that's obviously not a great diagnosis to get. And she was able to hang on and fight for a while, and I spent a lot of time with her, but um, it set me to a place where I'm like, what do I really want to do? How do I want to really use my time? And how do I think about not just being successful, but how do you think about impact, and how do you think about, um, you know, impacting others? Not just like when we think about Boll and Branch as making this really tremendous impact around the world, but I was just thinking about in a much more simple terms, like, all right, the fun tank period of time, I don't actually view it as all that successful. I just think I learned a lot, and losing my mom put me in a spot where I just became really introspective, and I thought about how do I use my skills for a greater good. And I was seeing Tom Shoes and Warby Parker and a lot of these companies popping up, and I'm like, this is amazing. These guys they are undoubtedly doing really well commercially, but they're not leaving it there. They're taking it further and saying, how do I become a better citizen, and how do I use not just to disrupt an industry commercially, but how do I even think about social disruption? How do I think about going and I just became compelled. I'm like, I feel like I could do this. Like, I want to do this. I just didn't know with what or how or anything like that. And it was only as I got down the road of, at one point Missy and I had the idea of making sheets, but our starting point was probably what everybody else would do, which is you just call the regular importers, and you think about, okay, I can build a brand, and I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna sell it. And it was sort of like something in me was like, I gotta know more about what's going on here. Like, and so I just started digging through the industry and how these products are made and sourced. And I was like, that was when I came up with, okay, to make something better in this category, I got to make a whole better company. Like, we've got to do this differently from the jump. And so it set us on this path, which, so the third chapter, if you will, to me, even though I'm now 12, 13 years into it, I still feel like I'm in the beginning part of it, because we've just now proven the concept of wow, okay, there is commercial viability here. Like, we can make a real business and have something that leaves an impact. And so, I learned a lot in the first phase about like the technical knowledge of how to be a marketer and how to access a customer and how to think about those things. I learned how not to lead a company. And I think those things rolled up together into the Boll and Branch phase of this business. I'm just really proud. I think we've created a company people love to work at. I think we're doing a lot of good, and we make an amazing product that I'm really proud of.
I read that like Missy was looking for sheets. Is that sort of the
Yeah.
intersection of like, now you're at this phase in your life, and I'm sorry to hear about your mom, and
No,
um you're at this
it's
intersection, and she was like looking for sheets, and then you went down the rabbit hole.
yeah. And I was going down many different rabbit holes in many different categories, to be honest, at that moment.
Yeah.
I had all kinds of terrible ideas. And you know, when she was like, so we were redoing our master bedroom. It was sort of a little bit of like, hey, you're sad, you lost someone in your family. Let's start a big house project so we can hate that more than anything else in our lives. And so part of that was moving from the queen bed to the king bed. And she truly came home one day and she's like, I went to Bloomingdale's, I went to Bed Bath and Beyond. Like, I don't know what to get with sheets. And I was like, what is wrong with you? I just figured I'd solve the problem in 5 minutes on Google.
Yeah.
And then that was when I just started learning, like, all right, there's elements of this category that just need to be demystified for the customer. Like, we can do that. We can make it simpler to buy the product. It wasn't even at that point that I was starting to think about, like, okay, cotton. Where does cotton come from? Cotton doesn't have a great reputation, and so that came later. But the first phase truly was Missy having this problem, and then me on my own trying to go out and solve it, and then her stepping in at some point and saving. I would have lost my house and everything, because if I did this by myself, like, we would have had a great business model and ugly sheets.
It sounds like you guys make a good team.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I definitely want to talk about just like the reinvention of like the supply chain, so to speak, that you guys have
Mhm.
done. But if you're talking to somebody that they don't really know who you are, you get to know them maybe at a party or something like that, and they're like, okay, you founded this company, and they just say, hey Scott, like what should I look for in a good bed sheet? Like obviously you can go on for an hour, but like what do you
Yeah.
tell that consumer now in the brief time that you might have in that type of interaction?
Yeah. I mean, the first question I would ask them is, what are they looking for in terms of feel? Because at the end of the day, there's really two key attributes that you're going to get to in sheets, and you have to force rank them for yourself. So you're going to
Okay.
say, I want something that's really soft, or I want something that keeps me really cool. Um, and forever, that's what the industry has been based on, is like, I want cool and crisp, or I want soft and cozy. And um, the answer to that question for 90% of people is soft, right? There's a very small actual percent of people that are willing to give up softness for
Really? Okay.
cooling or something like that. And that doesn't mean flannel or anything like that. But most people say, what do you want in sheets? I want soft. And so, you know, and I tell them the best thing you could possibly do is go into a store and feel the product. Don't read the label. Don't look at anything on it, because 90% of what you're going to see in this industry is a bunch of baloney on the package. So go in and feel it. And if you're lucky, you'll be in a place that someone lets you feel a product that's been washed more than once, because a lot of these products feel much better in the package than they do after they're washed.
Interesting. Well,
Um,
what did they say? My kid has rashes, and like I need something that's also like good for them. You know, they don't know everything that you guys do, but like, what advice would you
yeah.
give? And obviously, you guys are a good option, but like, what do you tell them about that?
Well, when you talk about sensitivity in skin, I believe that organic cotton is where you need to go. That's why if you look at the baby market, it's dominated by organic cotton. It hasn't quite taken hold to the same extent in the overall bedding market, but when you think about, cotton's a natural material, right? Most bedding is made from cotton. There's other things, like people say bamboo. That's just rayon. It's just a fancy, like, it makes me feel
Is
better
it
about
okay?
myself word for rayon. Yeah. It's like microplastic. Like, there's tencel, there's other things like that. But for the most part, it's cotton. And cotton grows in farms and on fields. And at the end of the day, what happens, that cotton's pick, old Eli Whitney's gin takes out the seed, they spin it into thread, and that thread is woven into a fabric. And that's what makes a bed sheet. And so when you look at most conventional cotton and how many chemicals and pesticides are used to make it grow, right? So these seeds that come from Monsanto or whomever else, I mean, they could basically grow on pavement as long as you put the right chemicals on it. Um, and so, cotton's something like 5% of the world's crops, but 20% of the world's pesticides, 10% of the world's insecticides. So it's a pretty, high impact product, from an environmental standpoint. But that stuff, just there's no like process to take that back out of the
Hmm.
cotton. And
Is
what's
is
worse
all
is,
organic cotton created equal?
no, I mean, it's sort of like, I can go to Arby's and get a Wagyu beef burger. I can pay $150 a pound, right? Like, so, no, I mean, at the end of the
Okay.
day, cotton, cotton, cotton quality is its own separate set of measures. You're going to look at something called staple length. So that's like, you take that little clumpy white fiber and you stretch it out, and it's like how long that staple of cotton is. And the longer it is, that means the finer and stronger you can spin a thread. So the finer the thread, the more dense the fabric you're going to get. Um, and also, generally speaking, a finer, longer staple length is going to end up feeling softer when it gets washed, because it will break down. What makes cotton soft is it breaks down as it washes, but it breaks down extremely slowly. So
Okay.
as it's breaking down, it starts getting softer and softer and softer. And so the best quality cotton will just break down literally almost forever without ever breaking.
So how far did you go down the rabbit hole of like we need to make sure, you know, we're fair trade certified? What does that mean to us? Like how because
Yeah.
you could have just called a importer or something, made a pretty
Yeah.
website and thrown in some money to AdWords and
Yeah. And I think,
chalked it
look, I
up.
mean, that there's, you could go look up, there's some plenty of companies in our category have done that and done it successfully, and great, good for them. That just didn't, I just have a hard time, in general with things. I need to know everything and I need to
Yeah.
learn everything. Missy's the same way. We're both like that. And so, from the moment in time we had that conversation around sheets until we were launching was like over 2 years. So this was not like,
Mm.
hey, and we could have been in market in 6 months if we wanted to. Um, but within a couple of weeks, I was meeting with folks, and it still took us over 2 years to get to market. And so my level of care goes all the way back to the seed. And in fact, Boll Branch looks after the process from the seed before it's planted, through the entire process. And so when I was doing my research, like at the start, you just learn a couple things. Like the first thing I remember learning so clearly was that the life expectancy of a conventional cotton farmer in India was 36. And I was like 35 or 36 at the time I'm going through this. Like, holy smokes. Um, that's crazy. Why? Right. And you start, it's buried, but it's out there. It's not hard to get at if you want to find it. And so you start learning things and you see, okay, I think about farms if I drive across the country and there's this all this like incredible technology that's tending to the farms. And you start learning about the developing world, and it's like, oh wow, this is a family that has 2 to 3 acres, and cotton is their access to cash, right? They're going to grow their own food, and they're going to grow cotton or soy or something like that, and they're going to use that as their cash crop. And they're buying these seeds, and they're buying the seeds along with a package of chemicals. And instead of and they probably have no education, so they may not be able to even read the warning labels. But at the end of the day, they're desperate to earn money because there's not a lot of economic opportunity there. So they're strapping backpacks to their backs with like these toxic chemicals with skull and crossbones all over them, spraying them out in the fields. And so they're getting it all over their bodies. So,
Mm.
you know, cancer rates, things like that get high. But where do the chemicals go? They go into the groundwater, and who's drinking it? Their families, their kids. Like, and so it's not just toxic on the crop; it becomes toxic for the entire village. And when I started learning that there was another way out there, I remember very vividly reading an article in the Guardian about it was about organic cotton. It was about a cooperative called Chetna that we ended up working with, and how they were started by a Dutch NGO, and they were doing their own seed harvesting and going into communities and helping them convert over to being organic, but how it was going to improve the lifestyle, the length of lives, teaching the communities to work as cooperatives and grow food and build schools and clean. And I was like, this is amazing. And the end of the article talked about how there was just no demand. Nobody wanted to buy their cotton.
Oh,
And I was like, that's it. We the, hi, I'm Scott. And like, I literally emailed the guy. I'm like, I'm Scott. I don't know anything about bed sheets, but I think I'm going to make some and I'm going to use your cotton. And they're like, that's great. I was like, so can you make them? They're like, no, we're just a farm. I'm like, what do you mean? You can't just make me sheets? They're like, well, no, we can gin the cotton, but we have a gin here. I'm like, oh, that's great. All right. So I can get gin cotton. What do I do with that? And so it started at like working with Chetna, and Solidaridad was the NGO that had started them, and starting to actually understand what goes into why they really went about doing this. And I started learning that like where I was surface level in some of the issues and something like life expectancy, they went way deeper. Um, and so we had to actually put our own supply chain together, largely using folks that made apparel for companies like Patagonia and whatnot, but like weren't doing anything in home because nobody in the home industry tended
oh,
to kind of care about this. Um, and so we put our own supply chain together over those 2 years, and at every step of the way, we were making a choice of where we were going to bring it, so we could look at their individual standards, we could audit them ourselves. And that's when I brought fair trade in, because I'm like, I really should not be auditing this. A, because it should be someone independent. B, because I don't know what I'm doing. I could make a video game out of this whole process, but I
yeah.
don't really know what I'm doing. And and they were amazing. And so it was them and a group called GOTS, the Global Organic Textile
Mm.
Standards. And we became the first home brand to even think about fair trade. Um, to the point that when we got to market and we had our moments, but we ended up starting to really grow. Um, we were buying almost all of Chetna's cotton by the end. Like it went from they were selling their cotton into the conventional marketplace, that we and then I'm probably the biggest advocate for this you'll find. Like you starting an apparel company, you need to know some sources and suppliers. Like I spent 2 years and at this point millions of dollars building a supply chain, but I will give you those blueprints because it's important. And so we've done a lot of that and helped to really drive demand.
So at this point in your life, I heard, I don't know, you tell me, like I'm thinking about risk tolerance. I heard like you
Yeah.
invested a lot of money in the company in the beginning. Like when you think about risk tolerance at that point, where were you in Missy?
Where was I or where was Missy? So that's a good question. So I, I I was lucky and I had sold the company, but I was rolling all of that money into this, and I looked at savings. I'm like, all right, I can kind of do this for a couple years, 3 years maybe, without income before I'm like really in trouble. That was at least the plan and the thought process. As we got into it, I was like, I need more capital. But I know as soon as I had enough capital to get us to market, but once we got to market, I needed to start scaling inventory. We were having like demand got crazy early on. So now we've got to really start investing in this. And I was deathly afraid of venture capital because I didn't want anybody else's objectives other than mine. I wanted to build the right kind of company. I didn't want to be thinking about an exit. I didn't want to be thinking about liquidity or any of the things that VCs have to think about. They're investing people's money. I don't have any, like, that's their business. But I didn't want that, so I self funded and I started using SBA loans, which is, look, I was in my 30s. I owned a house. Like I had things I could collateralize, but they let you recollateralize and recollateralize up to $5 million. So within a year and a half, I had tapped. I had $5 million in debt. I had spent all of my liquid capital on this. I did have a line of credit that I could like pay my mortgage and do that kind of stuff with it. So separately, that
So
I'd
you were
gotten
all
beforehand.
in.
Oh, I was all in. And Missy she knew, but she like, I don't know. We never talked about what if this doesn't work because like we were going to make it work. And that's just Missy and my nature. And fortunately it worked out well. Like we, neither one of us would say we're the smartest people in any room we walk into, but no one will out hustle us and no one will outgrind us. And we grinded the hell out of this business early on. And so the only money I raised before we did a private equity round is I raised some friends and family just to reduce my debt footprint because it got to the point I'm like, this is nuts, and I'm not drawing a salary because I wanted to keep the money in the business. But about 3 years in, we raised some money, and that like took care of like some of my debt, and then when we brought in Cattered in, it took care of the rest of it, and cleaned up our cap table.
Was it easy to convey the value proposition to other people at that point?
It got easier because we had the proof point on the other side of it, right? So it
Mm,
wasn't just a dream; it was a dream with like data against it. And so we started to be able to talk about our supply chain, not just in terms of what we're giving to others, but what benefit the business gets. So we ended up with a business with really strong margins because
mm.
we're not relying on a whole system of middlemen. I'm not getting a markup at every step of my supply chain because we're working with folks like we have a partner in Madurai that we work with now to verticalize their business. So they started just weaving for us. So we're coming from some other spinner, bringing it to them, weaving it into fabric, and then taking it to another factory to cut and sew. Um, at one point it's like, well, what if you guys built a cut and sew division and we can help you do it, we'll co-invest with you in it. And now they're also spinning, so now we're bringing in raw cotton and finished products coming out the other side, so they're getting a lot more work. Their workers are out now, able to like bring their friends and whatnot. We're creating
Wow.
more jobs with really low turnover. It becomes one place for it's like 25-30% of our sheets are coming out of this one facility. But from a quality control standpoint, right, our team, it's much easier for us to monitor everything and audit the financials and audit like how much people are getting paid. But the benefit to the business is the margins are actually really strong on the other side of it. So I'm actually winning on cost of goods versus these traditional luxury brands that are charging 2-3 times what we are for basically similar quality. So we're giving a lot more value to the customer,
Awesome. And so at this point, the girls are fairly young. How are you balancing everything?
including them in it. So our girls have been to India multiple times to our factories. I think
Really?
Missy and I made a decision
Cool.
early on that everyone's like, you got to like put the walls up around it, and just didn't make sense to us. First of all, um, you have three girls growing up in this world where, fortunately, I believe compared to any other generation, there's more opportunity in front of them. And having having a grandmother that was an entrepreneur, a mom, the idea that they can't just do anything is like so foreign to them. But this has been a family business from the start. And even when they were little, like we have photos of our very first office and our girls like screwing together tables for me with me on a Saturday, or, you know, um, coming over to India, and they had not been outside of the US. Like I think they made one trip to the Caribbean, and their next trip was to India, right? Rural India. And so, you know, I think they see their parents like dreaming and then working hard after that dream. And now, my oldest daughter's interned for us for 2 summers this year. The gig's up. She's got to go get her own job, but actually, she's doing something else. But like, it's really great to have them participating and feeling connected. And we don't let our dinner tables become board meetings. Like we can't do that
Yeah.
because that's a little too much. Because they have their lives and they have their stories to tell and whatnot. But they're super clued into the business, and it's exciting. I mean, during COVID, they started our brand's TikTok, and they got like 5,000 followers. It's pretty amazing. They're like, it's a little off brand to have a bunch of Harry Styles memes, but
You've got the perfect age daughters to do it. I'm sure they understand.
yeah,
I mean, I have it downloaded. I can still barely use it. I only like use it
yeah,
when my
exactly.
wife sends me a link and I open TikTok. Okay, when you think about I want to talk about product mix, but I don't want to miss like the inflection points in the business. You shared some key
Sure.
ones. Was there
Mhm.
another inflection point? Maybe it was like making mattresses and furniture, but was there another inflection point that you think is an important like business lesson that you learned growing the business?
Yeah, we launched with a really simple product line. We had sheets in 2 colors and blankets in 3 colors. That's it. And so there was a lot we weren't doing. We weren't making duvet covers. We weren't making bed blankets. We weren't making any of those other things. And my feeling was, let's be really good at one thing in particular. And so about a year or so in, we still hadn't really been advertising. And I am admittedly a knucklehead that from the time I was in high school, listened to Howard Stern every morning. And I have bought so much dumb stuff off that show over the years. I mean, I can't even tell. I don't drink tequila, and I have tons of Avion tequila because he talks about it. Squatty potties, you name it. It's a family audience. I get it,
I've got one of
but
those too. Yeah.
awesome. And so um, I I was like, Howard can sell this stuff because people trust Howard. And it like didn't make sense. We're a luxury brand. We're in the organic space. Like, why Howard? But we ended up sending him and his wife sheets, and they loved them. And so we're like, let's do it. And the last $2 million in debt that I took on the business was because there was a $2 million minimum for SiriusXM to advertise with Stern. And so I had to commit $2 million to a business that our first year we did like 1.7 in sales. So we were in our second year in business at this point. And I was like, let's do it. Like I just believed so strongly in Howard.
Did,
And
did Missy, was she also like a big Howard Stern fan, or was this you had to
I mean,
convince
I, well, when you're married to me, you consumed a lot of Howard
her?
Stern. She didn't grow up listening to Howard, and she
Okay.
only knows the older, softer side of Howard, who does great interviews. Like
Yeah,
she's not as much of the fart man Howard
yeah,
as I am, but anyway, so we turned it on. We turned on the spigot with SiriusXM and Howard Stern, and the next thing we knew, we could not put money fast enough into SiriusXM and radio advertising, and so we jumped to $13 million in sales in our second year. Howard crushed it for us. He later heard the story that I literally took the last $2 million of loans I could take, and Gary Delabate told me, he's like, Howard thinks you're an idiot.
yeah.
So
That's awesome.
but it's great. And so we hit this point of all of a sudden but it made sense. We were advertising, everybody else was advertising on Facebook and Instagram, and we hung a left turn and we went deep on audio, and at a time where not many brands were there. And if you think about it, there's no difference in production value between Budweiser and Boll Branch on audio. It's just somebody talking. And so I think we were able to be, really successful. I think in the years since, there's become a lot of clutter on audio, so now it's a much smaller part of our mix. But we guessed right at the right time with the right partner, and yeah, there is a Howard Stern conference room in our office that will be there forever. But I
That's
shouldn't say
awesome.
that because he might charge me a licensing fee.
That's funny. So when you think about the business now, what percentage, I'm curious, with what you can share, like how much of it is
Mhm.
sheets versus like the actual mattresses and furniture that you
Yeah.
guys make?
So I could care less how much furniture we actually sell. Like, I think that's kind of, we just launched furniture a year ago. People, how big a business that could be? I'm like, I'm not sure. It's actually ended up being a pretty good sized business for us, but it was really, we were custom making this stuff in our stores. People were asking for it. And I didn't want to do these things where you order it and then 12 weeks later it shows up. Like, I thought we could offer a better customer experience in that. So Missy designed this amazing furniture. And it's
So you
sold,
guys actually make
online
the
with,
furniture,
oh yeah.
or
We don't do,
okay.
we do nothing the easy way. So
Yeah, because I've talked
everything
to
is,
companies that have furniture on their website, but they don't actually make it.
no, nobody does that. Only
Swear.
people that are
Okay.
crazy like us do that.
Okay.
So we design it, we make it, we warehouse it, so it can be to you in a week. And I didn't realize how compelling a part of the business proposition that would be. It was more just because that's not a customer experience I want to offer. Where it's like, yeah, we'll make your couch in any color in the rainbow. It's like, but it'll
Yeah.
take you 3.5 months to get it. Like, that's terrible. Um, and so, but anyway, getting back to it. So sheets are now less than half of our business. 5 years ago, that was 80% of our business. So we do quite a big business in pillows and blankets, duvet covers, and things like that. Mattress, furniture, um, probably all rolled up together is around 10% of the business, but and that exceeds what I would expect it would have been, because we don't advertise it, we don't really promote it. It's available in our retail stores, but they're tremendously high quality products. We just have avoided the cesspool of customer acquisition competition in those spaces. I mean, the mattress industry is a little bit of a race to the bottom. So I
Right.
always felt
Yeah.
you're better off just making an amazing quality product and riding on reputation, than you are trying to go compete with people that shove it in a box and tell you it's like nice.
If someone's looking at the mattress, is it similar to like an avocado mattress in terms of like non-toxicity and latex? Is that kind of the area, sort of the customer, the audience that you target?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say it's more of a luxury
Yeah.
mattress, but similar ethos.
Okay.
Everything is non-toxic, and we're using latex coils, things like that. So it's more traditional in its product form, but it's organic cotton, and everything about it is just cleaner
Okay.
for,
How are
for
you
the
on
end
time? Do you
user.
have like 15 more minutes?
I get as much time as you want.
Okay, cool. Tell me about some of the coolest people you've met uh, throughout this business. Because I heard about some presidents.
Yeah,
we talk baseball players, but like, what are some of the cool experiences?
yeah. So I mean, I get to meet President Clinton, which is pretty cool. Um, I've
You went to his house, I read, or no?
no, God, no.
Okay.
He was speaking somewhere, and I got invited to meet him because he's a fan of the brand and whatnot. And I went backstage, and he was the coolest guy. He just was like so personable. He knew the brand, knew the company, and like I felt like $1 trillion when I was talking to him. And actually, it was funny because I was telling him, and this goes back a way. So it was early on in our business, and he was asking like how we were funded, and I was like, well, actually we're using SBA loans. It's like, well, I was involved in starting the SBA loan program, and I was, you don't expect someone to pull that out, and so it was like, what's interesting about it, and I remember telling him, I'm like, I'm an older entrepreneur, at this point I'm in my late 30s, and I'm like, I'm an older entrepreneur, but when I think about a young entrepreneur, they've got nowhere to turn but venture capital and places like that for capital for their business. And he puts his arm around me and he goes, my wife happens to be running for president, and I'm going to put the word in with her. And this was when she was running.
That's funny.
So that was great. Gosh, I've met so many amazing people, and what's amazing to me has been, um, when people reach out, um, and are like Jenna Bush reaching out to us and saying how much she and her family love the brand and the products, and or people walk into our retail stores. I always hate to like unveil who some of these people are, but like, I've had rock legends that live in South Jersey walk into our South Jersey stores, and they're like, "Oh, is Scott here?" And like, of course, I'm in the office and not there. And I'm like, "How can I get there fast enough?" Like, these are like, I'm a Jersey boy. These are my
Yeah.
people.
Have you met Bruce Springsteen? Is that someone or no?
I have not met
Okay.
Bruce. No, I've never gone. I've gone to many of his concerts, but I've not met him.
That's cool.
Yeah,
What before I forget to ask you, where did the name come from? What does it mean?
yeah. So if you think about if you're imagining a cotton plant, right? You think about that white fluffy clump of cotton. Well, that grows out of a seed, and that seed shell is called the boll, which grows in a branch.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So you ever heard of a
Interesting.
boll weevil? A boll
No.
weevil is like a bug that I mean, again, cotton humor here,
Yeah.
cotton deep cotton knowledge, but it's a bug that digs into the cotton shells and will like eat away at the cotton.
Interesting.
But
Okay. This is good.
yeah,
I mean, I need to educate myself, so this is good. Okay.
if you go too
Um
deep, you'll start a company.
yeah, no. I have side conversations with people just the other day of like clothing brand. Like I've had a chance to like interview like the guy from American Apparel, not American Apparel, American Giant, you know, who like really
Yeah,
wanted to bring manufacturing in the US, and yeah, I'm sure you guys have a lot in common. But yeah, I've randomly got to know quite a few people in the retail space. Okay, let me ask you this. If I were to ask your team what kind of leader you are, what would
mhm.
you hope they would say about you?
I hope they would say that I am predictable, um, and kind, and generous. And I always tell people when they start, I'm like, look, my job is to make the best decision possible for the company every single time. And 99 times out of 100, that's going to be the best decision for you. Um, there may be times when it's not, and but just know that I'm always going to approach everything I do from the standpoint of what is best for the company and our values and living what we are. And so, um, you know, I don't know. I mean, people can post Glassdoor reviews of us and whatnot, and give us feedback in different ways. And I take that stuff really seriously because at the end of the day, um, I I do want to be liked as a leader because I want people to like their time at Boll and Branch. I think yes, the job market's tough, but we hire really talented people. These people can get jobs anywhere they want. And so I've got to make sure that they are getting so much value out of their time at Boll and Branch so that they stay and they grow with us. And I think we've been really successful at retaining key folks. But yeah, I hope at the end of the day that they would say, I admire the fact that Scott's not always right, that you know, he tries to be as humble as you can, as a bit of an egomaniac, but still, but no, tries to stay humble and yeah, and supports them, and I would say, I mean, I've mentioned, actually, if I answer that question differently, I would say it this way. I actually hope that what people would say about me is that Scott has put everything in his life into this business, and his family is still more important to him. You know,
Yeah,
and
I
and
love that.
and I believe that family, and even for my members of my team, like I want them to be able to thrive in that aspect of their life, and for work to fit around it much more so
Yeah.
than the other way.
Sort of
But
like leading by example. I always look for interview hacks, like I
yeah,
study other interviewers. And asking someone to answer a question in someone else's sort of words, it makes it much harder to not like lie, but like you almost feel like you're indebted to like say what would that person say if I named somebody on your team or whatever. And so it's I always recognize it's a hard question to answer. So
yeah,
I love how it actually goes back to your family and your dad being the example of being present, right? Like
hmm
it kind of goes back. Okay. What would you say is the most like the accomplishment you're most proud of over the last 5+ years, right? So obviously starting the company and the way you guys did is great. But over the last 5+ years, what accomplishment are you most proud of for you and the team?
it's a really good question. Um, I would say that it it's hard to pinpoint it, but I would say that we've been really intentional about the culture we've built, and we didn't lose it in COVID, and we haven't
Mm,
lost it in the world since COVID. Um, when we were all apart, um, the team found ways to come together that blew me away. And I think the company in general, it changed a lot in COVID because people felt, because they were a little bit separated, people really did feel that sense of, wait, this is my business also, and it's not just like Scott and Missy's business that I'm trying not to screw up. Like it's really theirs. And so I started to see this bubbling up of ideas that were coming from places that weren't Mitzi and I. So during COVID, when our mattress factory was still open, and somebody had seen on the news that New York City needed mattresses, so we kept our factory running and started making hospital grade mattresses that we were shipping up to the Javits Center and places like that, where they were doing these COVID recovery facilities. And we ended up raising, we connected with customers, and we ended up raising well over $100,000, and sent thousands of mattresses up to New York City. And the whole program was created by the team, and they did it on their own. And it was just like, hey Scott, this is what we want to do. What do you think? I'm like, just do it.
That's
Um,
cool.
and I think that those kinds of wins have stayed with us. Such that, like, it's hard to like pinpoint, but every day something else is coming up where it's like, oh, you guys did that, that's awesome, and it just makes you feel so proud.
I love that. How do you think about sacrifice when someone asks you about, like, okay, you've been so successful at, like, what's your relationship with sacrifice, or how do you think about that when it comes to success?
um i I don't know if I look at things as sacrifices as much as I look at it as priorities. And you know you can't be 100% at everything. And I know that there have been a lot of times where, my non-negotiables are things like my family. My non-negotiable is my employees, right? Because they're relying on this business, and I have to, if they're trusting me with their career and their time, I have to put my all into this, right? I'm not going sitting on a beach somewhere or anything like that. And so yeah, there are definitely aspects of my personal life. I don't see my friends as much as I'd like. I don't get to play golf and do the things that I love to do as much as I'd like. And so, as like, as I said, we have a finite amount of time. And so to me, the sacrifices ultimately come around time. But I think I do a good job of keeping those non-negotiables at the top of the list.
Yeah.
And trying to, trying to just be present in whatever I'm doing. I really have made a concerted effort the last, really, like 4 or 5 years. I mean, you have to keep in mind the beginning of this business, our 800 number, which was 20, we said, oh, we have 24/7 customer support. It rang my cell phone. That's why, right? Like, and and so, but I don't bring work home
Yeah.
whenever possible. I I I just try to, like, you know, when I'm with my friends, like, I try to be with my friends, not take calls, do that sort of thing. And because, I mean, you know how it is in a business like this, there's always something to do. And so, I think, but yeah, there are definitely sacrifices, but I try to make sure that those sacrifices don't make me sad at the end of
Yeah.
the day.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of us talking to, like, the founder, I think his name was Eric, Threads for Thought, which I'm sure
Mm,
you have heard of those guys. And he told me that he leaves his phone, like, downstairs or something like that in the office, because it's almost like, let me take the phone out of the equation, so I don't feel like the need to check on it when I'm putting the kids to bed, or
yeah,
whatever it is. So that, I love that. It's not like you have to. I think and you probably seen this from people around you, is like the sacrifice becomes family, and it doesn't have to be
yeah,
that way, right? You can
it doesn't.
integrate family at the same time.
And I always think also, I'd never ask anybody on my team to make a choice or a sacrifice that I wouldn't make either. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sort of notorious. Like, I definitely walk around the office around 5 o'clock. Like, why are you still here? Go home. Like, get out of here. And I love the concept of leaving loudly. If my kids have, I do not miss a game, right? So if my kids have a game, I go, and I expect for my employees, for them to, they don't have to ask permission. Like, your kid's the butterfly in the school play. You're there. You go. Like,
Yeah.
don't, everybody else can pick up around you. Just be honest about what you've got, and don't make the sacrifices that, again, you'll regret and will make you feel sad, like, over the long term, right? There's small sacrifices we can make, that you have to make, but maybe try not to make the big ones if you can
Yeah.
avoid it.
Is there something you do whether it's some kind of self-care routine, whatever it might be, like what do you do to show up as the best version of yourself at work and at home?
I get a lot of sleep. No, I'm just kidding. I
I
do,
mean,
but
that's number one for me, but yeah, I hear
yeah.
you.
Um, I always try to take a little bit of time for myself. I do my best thinking when I'm being left alone. So it's funny. I Every night I go in the hot tub. 30 degrees outside. I'm in the hot tub. And so for like 15 minutes or whatever it is, and I might just listen to a podcast. I might, you know, play Candy Crush, like you
Yeah.
name it. But I just try to like allow myself to be awake and relaxed. Because I think some people, the only time they relax is when they go to sleep. But I think it's cathartic for me. Like I do find I do my best thinking um, that way when I'm just sort of like zoned out or
Yeah, it's
spacing
almost like
out.
your meditation sort of in that sense.
Yeah, I guess so. Exactly. Guess so.
That's cool. I'm really bad at meditating.
Yeah, I can't do it either.
When I started taking ice baths like on and off, and to me that's like
Oh,
it's a meditation because like I'm not really on my phone. I can't really be because my hands are in, and so I'm just forced to breathe and look straight or like look outside.
yeah. I tried a cold plunge for 3 seconds. I was like, I'm never
You
doing
know,
this again.
yeah, I did
No.
it. I did it for 2 months every other day, and then I just recently rebooted it. Um,
People say they feel great. I just don't have the kind of personal strength to do it.
yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I don't even. I mean, there's so many benefits. I've tried to write about it. I think the biggest thing for me personally is I do feel great afterwards. It's like drinking caffeine or something like that. You're up and awake. But to me, it's like I think it's a stress reliever. Like if I can do that,
Yeah.
that's the hardest thing in my day. The
Mm,
evening routine, all that stuff is trivial compared to doing
yeah.
something that is uncomfortable for me. And I'm fine when I'm in. It's just getting in is the hard part. But I think
Yeah.
that's what I get most out of it. Okay. Is there a book that has made a big impact on you that you recommend other people read?
Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. Um, I have a bunch of books. That's the one that right now, someone on my team read it and passed it to me, and I felt so strongly about it that I had the whole company read it. I didn't
Wow.
force them, but I think everybody did. And I'm just a big believer in serving others through business, and I don't mean that in like a religious sense or anything like that. I just mean that at the end of the day, when someone gives you their money and is buying something from you, you owe them not just the product, but you owe them everything that goes along with it. And I think that if you embrace the spirit of hospitality, and Will, who's the author, had run 11 Madison Park, which is one of the finest restaurants in New York, and he would go to incredible lengths to create memorable experiences for people. And it's sort of like Maya Angelou. People don't remember how you what you did, but they remember how you made them feel, and I just really buy into that. I also love Burn the Boats by Matt Higgins. If you haven't read that, you should read. Matt's actually a really good friend, and I find you know again his approach to not editing yourself because of your expectation of failure, but believing in success is to me is very
Mhm.
empowering.
I'll have to check that out. I've seen him on
Yeah,
Shark Tank, and
yeah, you should have him on. He's the
he's
best.
good. I've
He's
seen
such
him
a
on
good
my
guy.
friend. My friend has a good. You probably like this podcast. It's called the Learning Leader Show, and
Okay.
it's hosted by Ryan Hawk. And Matt has been a guest. I mean, Ryan has like 500 plus episodes. I've listened to probably a third or half of them. But I'll check out the one with Matt. I'll check out his book too. Okay, your last question. You're talking to someone early on in their career.
Mhm.
Maybe it's one of your daughters in a few years. I imagine they've got to. I know some people say you've got to do your own thing first before you come back to the family business. But what are two or three pieces of life/career advice you would impart on someone early on in their career who want to make an impact?
Um, First of all, I think it's really important to work for people. Um, I think that in a world where we value, young entrepreneurs and talent and whatnot so much, um, people should not underestimate the value of learning. the value of watching. And because you can learn from great leaders, you can also learn from poor leaders, right? You can learn so much from just being out there around what you would do differently in a situation and how you might think about it, and understand how people approach different things. um, there's a reason that college teaches us what we get a lot in the classroom in college, but then when you get out there, there's a different type of real world experience. And so I would say the first piece of advice is like, just learn from people, and go anywhere you go, and take that attitude of, I am here to learn. Like, I know nothing, and I'm here to learn. You have skills, but you might not know anything yet. So take your skills, apply them, and be willing to, like, to do that. I also think that that for young people, you know, if you're going to do something, especially entrepreneurial, do it differently. Like, actually take the time to deconstruct what you're attempting to accomplish, and put it back together in a way that makes sense for you. And I think, again, like, we're proof of that. I didn't know anything about how a textile supply chain really worked. Um, what we've put together, because we hire people now that have worked in the industry for a long time, it's so radically different for how everybody else operates. But it made sense to us, and I think that's one of the reasons we've been able to be successful, is we're so much more efficient, because we were never burdened by the, this is how it's supposed to be, or this is the way it's supposed to be done. We just had to figure it out. So I think there's great value in not just sort of like surface level disruption, but actually reinvention and recreation, because I think that's what's going to propel the world forward. That's what people are going to, someone's going to then come around, if they take that approach and take everything we've done and do it better next time. It may put us out of business, but hey, there's a lot of people that have benefited from it too. So
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you mentioned like who you work for is important. Embracing the beginner's mindset is what I think about
yeah.
from what you just described, like deconstructing it. There was a guy, his name is Jacob Petchenik, if I'm saying his last name right, but he's been successful in multiple industries, like a software,
Hmm.
exited a couple software companies, founded them, uh, decided to produce and finance films, like 35 of them. Um, Met his wife Zoe Deschanel on the last film that he produced, and then saw this problem with the food supply chain, and thought, half the nutrients from the spinach that get to the truck, to the store, to your house, half the nutrients are gone. And when I asked him about like the common denominator of his success in multiple industries, he said the same thing. He said, like, go in, like, it's almost like better if you haven't been in this industry, because then you have all these like fake guardrails, and you need to embrace a beginner's mindset. And like, who cares what
Hmm.
people think? People think you're crazy, but like, that's the approach you need to have. And I mean, it's pretty intimidating to like deconstruct the cotton supply chain for bedding. I mean, that sounds like daunting in itself. But I think you guys are a great example of that, and it can be done.
Yeah,
So I love that.
yeah, and one of the things, I don't know if it's related or not, but it's probably an interesting anecdote for me. So I'm dyslexic. And I found out I was dyslexic when, like, later for most people. So it's the beginning of high school. And, I got to a point where the work was getting really hard in places maybe it shouldn't have been getting hard. And so finally, I got tested, and it was as clear as day. But I think what that taught me early on was that I I'm actually created a little bit differently. Not worse, not necessarily better. Although sometimes I think dyslexic dyslexia is a great advantage. Um, but I learned really early on that, like, I was imperfect, but that all things were kind of a little different and a little bit imperfect as a result. And so um, you never have to follow the same consistent, settled path around um, accomplishing something, because and let me I'm a little bit all over the place in how I say this, but like, I assume you're not dyslexic, and so you may approach a simple math equation or a simple challenge in a very linear fashion. For me, I'm like a ping pong ball, right? I
Yeah.
just go in a different way. Now eventually we both reach that same end, right? Or maybe a slightly different end, but let's say we reach the same end. And that I think sort of highlights something that's like a great lesson for entrepreneurs to think about. It's like, don't worry about the path as much as you think about where you are, think about where you're trying to go, and figure out your path to get there. Because none of us were all made there's no right or wrong answer here. There's just how you figure it out. And so don't take for granted that everybody else is doing it right. Like, we all tend to walk into places and think, wow, these guys, this company is so great, they're doing it great, they're doing it right. We don't know, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine you subscribe to this too. But like when people ask me like, what are the best practices? I'm like, best practices, dude. I just failed like 35 times. And this is what I learned. I try to think of them as micro failures. And I feel like I'm trying to be more aware. I know I can be. But I feel like I learn a lot more from the setbacks than the best practices or successes.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think as long as you have the attitude that the setbacks don't like crush you, which you got to have that short memory, like a relief pitcher. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Like Al later in his career,
exactly,
probably.
exactly, exactly.
That's funny. Well, Scott, it was great to meet you. This was
Yeah,
awesome.
this is fun.
I always say it's my job not to screw it up from here.